Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to give a great big thank you to yourself and Jim for organizing this virtual crank-in. It's quite a neat idea. I understand you've gathered a huge amount of people, and it could be the start of something new. Just like everything else that's coming from this pandemic, people are changing their ways of doing things, and this may become a new venue for us all. So again, thanks a lot. I know it's been a lot of work. You guys are going to be exhausted by the end of the day tomorrow, but we certainly appreciate it. And, you know, so far so good, and I think it's going to be a big success. So here we go. Unfortunately, in my workshop, we don't have Wi-Fi, so I'm unable to do a virtual tour. So I essentially brought all my workshop into and installed it on my dining room table. So I'd like to go through all that. We'll walk through our new machines, all the parts that go into them, what they look like before and after, advantages of the machine, disadvantages. We'll look at some of our accessories and some of the custom work we do. But there will be a lot of you who don't know me or Kathy, so I'd like to just talk about my background for a little bit. I spent all of my working career as a textile engineer, a mechanical engineer, developing equipment and product for industrial textile industry. And that industry was making high pressure woven hose. And those hoses were actually woven on circular looms. So quite similar to the circular sock machines we're using now, except that it was actually a weave with many warp ends entering the loom rather than just one yarn feed on a knitting machine. So my background's there. I was the manager of the research and development department for 35 years, retired end of 2016. And all through my life, I've been a maker, I guess you would call it. I started at an early age when my parents used to get frustrated when I would dismantle their living room furniture with my rubber wrench. And it just went on from there. I got interested in sock machines about 2008, I guess, when I picked up my first one, or saw my first one at an old machinery exhibition. I kind of fell in love with its complexity yet simplicity. So I went on eBay and
Is it working?
we're on mute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I went on eBay and picked up a machine, and I actually bought it from quite a popular eBay seller. And it turns out this person, Elsie Belcourt, lives only about 20 minutes from us, and we've become good friends since. But when I dismantled that first machine to paint it, something came up and I got sidetracked and had to put it away for a couple months. When I came back to it, there was pieces missing for some reason. They got misplaced or whatever. So I made new ones. And word got out, and people started asking me for parts for their machines. So it just kind of spiraled from there, and eventually somebody just challenged me to make a whole machine. And that's what I did. And in 2016, we came out with the first machine. And you may see it tomorrow, actually, when Joanne does her toe-up demo. She should be using that prototype machine. That's about it for me. The other side of the business is my wife, Kathy. Although Kathy's not her real name, it's actually Andre.
Dave?
Yes?
Someone's asked that you speak a little closer to the microphone.
Okay, I'll bring my phone closer. Okay. There.
Can you see me now? Can you hear me better now? Okay, so my wife, Kathy, her real name is actually Andre. And she got the nickname because her father's name is actually Andre also. So it was a little confusing the same house with two people with the same name, kind of like on Bob Newhart with Larry and his brother Daryl and his other brother Daryl. So they happened to live beside a convent at the time, and the nuns there befriended her, and they started calling her Kathy because they thought she looked like Kathy on Father Knows Best. I didn't realize nuns watched Father Knows Best, but I guess they did. So that's where she got her nickname. Kathy and I actually met at work. She was in the accounting department, the credit manager. So she handled a lot of that, did a lot of the accounting. She was responsible for traffic, which is import, export, custom papers and all that. So her background lends well to what she does here, handling all the accounting side of the business and the shipping and customs work and all that stuff. So that's us. And then the other two employees we have, Leo, a retired fella who helps me in the workshop 3 days a week. And then there's Joanne, who has just come to work with us about a year now. And she's an avid knitter as well. And she works with us 3 days a week. So between the four of us, we managed to produce a fair amount of machines and a lot of replacement parts and custom parts. Yeah, so Chambord is the name of our company. It was a little confusing for some Quebec customers because there's actually a town in Quebec called Chambord. So everybody thought we were located there. The way it actually came about was we've been to France many times, and Chambord's a neat little town that we kind of liked. And we decided on that name somewhat because it incorporates the first three letters of her last name and the last three letters of my name. So CHA and ORD became Chambord. So that's what we call a farm. And then the farm name also became the business name. So here we are. Like I said, no Wi-Fi in the workshop, so I can't show you anything in there. It's just a very small personal workshop. When there's three of us in at the same time, it's pretty crowded, but we do manage to get things done. We're not a factory by any means. Everything that we produce is essentially handmade. We do have some CNC machines that do the bulk of the grunt work, but in the end, everything that goes through our hands and is finished and polished and just made to fit all by hand. So it's sort of an artisan effort, and that's somewhat the appeal of our machines. I'd like to show you now what you get when you buy a Chambord AccuKnitter 400. And the reason it's called AccuKnitter 400 is because it is actually inspired and was my best attempt to make a replica of the Legare 400, which came out of Quebec and is one of the more popular of the old machines. So this is a brand new one that you're seeing right now. It's going to Nancy Grimm, actually, in Indiana. It'll be shipping out on Monday. She chose, as every customer gets to choose the color of their machine. This one is called Houston Burgundy. It's a nice burgundy color. The machine is accentuated with brass and naturally polished steel parts. We have a brass plate that's attached to the machine, which carries the model and serial number of the machine, as well as the customer's name or nickname, whatever they prefer. So it's custom made to each customer with the plate, the color, and the equipment that they get with it. So the basic machine comes, as you see it right there, one cylinder, one river dial of their choice. It can be a cylinder up to 100 slots and a river dial up to 80 slots. With the machine, we also get the main weight stack. These weights are made in such a way that they can't come off no matter how you turn them, so there's no danger of them falling on your toe. To get them off, you actually have to lift up the weight and slide it out. When you slide it down, it can't come out. Beyond that, we get the weight buckle, the crescent tool, extra needle. We get 3 heel forks and weights. You get a pick tool, a latch tool, and the setup basket, and a complimentary skein of yarn made by a local artist here, and a bottle of oil, and a nice little Chambord sticker. So that's the basic machine. It comes in a fine box.
Dang.
The machine as received comes on this little portable shelf. When you receive the machine, this shelf is actually screwed into the bottom of the box, and the machine is mounted on it. So if you unscrew that from the bottom, you can lift the whole machine out of the box without actually having to be a contortionist and get down in there and loosen the thumb screws. So then the shelf also makes a nice little display stand, or if you want to transport the machine in your car, you don't want to take all the box and everything, you just set the shelf down on the floor in the back and everything's good to go. So here we're looking at some of the...
Dave, someone wants to know how much your weights weigh.
The weights, the total weight stack is about 4 pounds. The heel weight and forks weigh 14 ounces each.
And there's the stuff later.
Here's an example of some river dials that we make. This is the Chambord Dial, and it's actually a Pro Series. Normally the dials we supply with the machine are the Laguerre Creelman style bird's beak, but we also make the Pro Series dial. And the Pro Series is actually based on the old Gearhart design, which gives you a notch in the edge of the dial. And this, for discerning knitters, gives a much more even rib stitch. And the reason it does that is because with the fin on the dial, it acts like the fins on the cylinders. It acts like the fins on the cylinders. So when it's pulling the stitch in through the previous loop, it's actually pulling the yarn around the fin or around the fin on the dial. So it's pulling in the same amount of yarn per stitch. Whereas with a bird's beak, it's kind of cutting a corner when it pulls the yarn in. So the stitch isn't quite as long. So with the Pro Series style, it tends to give a more uniform rib stitch. We also make river dials in auto knitter style. The cylinders we make are cast iron as well as the river dials. We make cylinders up to 100 slots, and we make river dials up to 80 slots. This is actually an 80 slot dial here. Now our dials and cylinders are actually made of cast iron, and this is what the rough castings look like for the river dial and for the cylinder. They're quite heavy, but
Dave?
once you get them, yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, but somebody has a question. Are the Chambord dials and cylinders compatible with Laguerres or Anzacs?
They're compatible with Laguerre, and because the Anzac dials are just slightly bigger in diameter, they will fit there as well. The reverse isn't true, but the Chambord will fit in auto knitters and Anzac. The difference being you need an adapter for the pin for the hole in the center. The center hole in the Anzac is a little bit bigger than the Laguerre hole. That good? Okay. So yes, cast iron, I prefer that for the cylinders and dials. That material was chosen over 100 years ago because it's pretty much what they had. But it was also a good choice of material because cast iron is a nodular material, and the spaces between the nodules mean it will absorb oil. And so once the iron is seasoned, meaning that it's been oiled and the oil is absorbed into it, that oil stays there and it actually lubricates the needles. So it gives a very smooth sliding surface with good lubrication. Kind of like a frying pan. When you buy an old cast iron frying pan, you want to season it with oil. The oil sinks right into it, and that's what makes it do such a nice job. Cast iron in the past was a very brittle material, and it still is, but today's cast iron is much better than it was 100 years ago. So the dials, unless you get, you know, a high count dial with 70 or 80 slots, and the fins are very, very, very thin, for the most part, the dials are quite robust and not quite as breakable as they used to be. The machine that I make, other than the river dials and cylinders, is all made of solid steel. Steel is a strong material, and unlike cast iron, which is somewhat brittle, steel isn't. Steel is malleable. It will bend before it breaks. And as such, you can pretty much pick that machine up as it is and drop it on the floor, and you'll be hard pressed to break anything. Maybe the wooden handle or something like that. If anything is ever to break, the fact that it's modular, anything can be repaired and replaced easily. Any piece on the machine is detachable and replaceable. The machine is all made from what we call bar stock or tubing, and then they're machined to final dimensions. A lot of the material is cut by laser to the finished shape, and then we finish it in the workshop. Being modular, it makes for a lot of pieces for the whole machine. In total, I think there's about 67 parts that we have to fashion from raw stock. I've been told before that you know, my machines are cobbled together with water pipe and such, but I think the cobbling together, if we look at the ribber arm, for example, that's a finished ribber arm, and that's the finished one painted. That ribber arm is made from a bent piece of cold rolled material with a head that's assembled like that. This goes on there, and the mounting stem goes on there. All these parts are actually electrically fused together. They're not really welded. Welding assumes you're adding some filler material, which when the weld cools, it tends to shrink and pull your parts out of shape. What I'm doing is I'm fusing the parts together with the existing metal. It's being heated enough just to melt the two parts together. The base of the machine starts out with this chunk of 1-inch thick metal. I buy that to my specification, already laser cut. And I put it on my milling machine and I carve out everything that doesn't look like a base. And this is what it looks like in the end after it's been finished machined. After that, I add the mounting lugs, which are fused on there. I add the mount for the crank wheel, the screw housing for the river adjuster screw. That all gets added on. And this is what the semi-finished base looks like once it's all put together. The ring gear is essentially made from a plate of steel like this, which is machined on the lathe. I machined this piece here, which is the yarn carrier mount, and it comes out of a piece of stock that looks like this. That is then fused onto the ring gear, and you can see the fusing there is very, very subtle, but very strong. That's what it looks like after it's fused. It's all discolored from the heat. But once it's sandblasted, It looks ever so nice. Then this actually goes back on the buffing wheel and is highly polished till it comes out looking like it was actually chromed. I don't use any chrome on the machines. All of the bright parts are polished on a buffing wheel with jeweler's rouge. And what that does is it actually makes them so smooth and applies a wax finish to them that they tend to resist rusting. So the parts, all the bright parts, meaning the mast, the ring gear, the mount here, anything of that nature, they're all highly polished and they do resist rust. The crank gear is made up of 4 different pieces. Again, it starts out as a piece of plate steel. It's machined round on a lathe. And in the milling machine, all of the cutouts are made, the holes drilled, all the teeth are cut. And then another piece that we make is the hub. The hub actually fits in there. We add the crank handle and we add the counterweight. And that becomes the finished crank handle. Now the counterweight actually serves 2 functions. It first and foremost is a counterweight. So when you stop the crank in any position, it won't tend to turn back. This won't drop down under its own weight. The other advantage with the counterweight is you can use your other hand to actually turn the crank with it. You know, sometimes when you're trying to just jog the machine ahead 1 needle or half a needle, you kind of slip and it goes 3 or 4 needles. Well, with this, you can hold your handle as you normally would and just tap on the counterweight with your other hand, and you can just jog the machine ever so slightly. The iron carrier, which you see here, is actually made up of several pieces again. I buy these rough pieces laser cut, and then I prepare them. That goes in there. We put a stem on this and it all goes together like that. Again, everything's fused together, so it's strong, won't come apart. The heel forks start out as just a sheet metal that I buy laser cut, and then I finish them off and we go from there. The camshell starts off just as a piece of tubing. We machine it to size, and then I add a bottom ring on it. Again, this ring is fused on, and that becomes the bottom surface that actually turns on the base and allows the cylinder to retain it so it doesn't come out. So by doing this, I save a lot of material. Otherwise, I'd have to buy material with a wall thickness like that and machine it all the way just to end up with that. With this, I can go with a thinner tube, machine just enough off to finish it, and then this gets welded or fused onto the bottom, and it becomes our finished piece. Inside the camshell, we have the raceway for the needles to run on. And instead of being machined as actually part of that, which again would take a lot more material, I actually take some flat material and I roll it round to the correct diameter, and it slips inside and it's screwed in. There's 3 screws that hold that ring in place. Also on the camshell, we have the mount for the ribber. This is what it looks like when we make it. And it comes out of a piece of stock similar to that. And it is just, again, fused on. And then the holes are drilled for the mounting holes. So again, all modular. If anything were ever to break, it's easily replaced. This is also strong. Again, I do demos once in a while where I actually drop it onto a concrete floor and there's no damage. Beyond that, we have the cams that go into the machine. We have the lower cams here. They come from a piece of plate material. Now this is very good material. It's actually aircraft steel. It's a chromium steel alloy, very hard, and it can be hardened even harder afterwards. So I put a piece of plate in my milling machine. We cut out the shape 4 at a time, drill the holes, mill the groove, and then we put it in a press to actually curve them to the correct shape so that they fit inside the cam shell. Same goes with the V cams, piece of plate material to start. We machine them out, drill the holes, and then they go in the press and they're curved to the correct diameter. The handle for the machine starts out as a chunk of firewood. Comes from our forest in the back of the farm here. Canadian maple. We turn it down on the lathe, then it's finished with a stain and about a dozen coats of clear lacquer. So it's a very comfortable handle. It's fat and longer than the original, so it fits comfortably in your hand, and it actually makes cranking easier to accomplish. And the fact that it's got all those coats of lacquer on it, it's quite pleasing to the feel and quite warm.
Okay.
On the V-cam, we have the little brass nut and the tension adjuster knob and screw, which allows the V-cam to move up and down. These are all made in our shop from various bits of brass material. We do all the engraving here as well, on the knobs, on the tension gauges, on the brass nameplates on the machine.
The lady wants to know if they'll fit the speeds to the handle. It's complicated.
I'm not sure. The adjuster screw for the ribber lever is made from a piece of threaded rod. The ends are machined to accept the cam on that end and the adjuster knob on this end. Again, everything's modular. It can be pulled off, anything replaced if need be. The uplift cams, again, they're machined out to shape, and we fuse in a pin, and then they're going to be curved. And after that, they're highly polished and hardened. This is a rotary counter that we make. It's an optional accessory for the machine or for old machines as well. It'll fit any machine I've ever come across that has a 1-to-1 crank ratio. Now, the 1-to-1 meaning the crank gear and the ring gear have the same amount of teeth each. Some of the machines have a small crank gear, and so it takes more than one rotation of the crank to give one rotation of the actual machine itself. So as long as your machine has a 1-to-1, this counter will fit it. Now the counter will fit directly on the Chambord machines. They actually bolt on to the crank like that. Now with the Chambord machines, the hub on the crank already comes with the threaded worm gear section that will mate with the little gear on the counter. On the older machines where it doesn't have this, we have to add one. And this is the kit. When you buy a counter, this is what comes with it. You get the counter itself, you get the extension for the existing hub on the old machine. You get this axle extension, which goes in there and mates up against the original. And you get a longer screw that's matched to the machine you have, because most of the machines use a different thread for that. We get an alignment pin so that when you have your old crank gear, you can take it off, put that pin in, you put the new thing over it. And with the drill bit that's supplied, there's already a hole drilled through that new hub that you get. And as a guide, you drill into the old hub about 1/4 of an inch. This pin assures a perfect alignment. And once you get that done, we supply a couple little roll pins here, which you just push into there and then push into the new hole that you've just drilled. And then everything will be centered. You put this in, put it back on your machine, and then you bolt your crank onto it.
But we also have a YouTube video that explains how to install it.
Yeah, there is a YouTube video, as there are a few others as well for different things. But that's essentially how it goes. So the counter has advantages and disadvantages. It's pleasing to the eye. It retains the style of the old machines of 100 years ago. It's completely silent, and it is guaranteed to run for life. The disadvantage is that if you're a knitter who's knitting flat panels and you're knitting back and forth, it's not going to count, because every row forward will count 1 and every row backwards will count -1. So if you knit 50 rows back and forth, you're going to end up with 0. So that's a bit of a drawback there. But most people knit more socks than they do flat panels, so it's not too much of an issue. Winding down here, we have some of the accessories that we make. They're optional parts. We make the yarn masks in all different flavors. We make the straight kind. We make the offset one. The offset ones typically have a taper on the bottom. There's no tightening screw to hold them in place. They just actually fit tightly into their taper. So the taper version we make both in offset and straight. We make them also in brass. We also make a 2-piece mast. This actually screws together, and that was Kathy's idea, because she got tired of looking for long boxes that would accommodate these things when we had to ship them. So she said, why don't you make a 2-piece one? So we did, and she advertised it, and then they sold like hotcakes. It's obviously the longest piece in the whole kit, and when you're traveling or you want to put it into a box, sometimes that just makes it easier to do. It goes together perfectly straight, tight. It feels like one piece. Here we have what we call the tiptoe heel.
Tiptoe tool.
Tiptoe tool. It's a flat piece of stock with a good hole in it. When you're doing your toe up socks, knit your toe, and then you can run this up through the knit, put this in the top, and then hang your weight on it. Pulls down evenly on the toe that's already knit to give you weight for continuing on. This actually isn't our idea. It came from Karen Ramel in Vancouver, and we've built quite a few of them to this point. People are happy with them. They work well. Another accessory we have here is called the Sweet Spot heel fork and weight. It's just a long heel fork, so it's easy to grab onto and squeeze to get up inside. And the heel weight is just the right weight needed to pull down on your heel. And for the most part, you set this once, and it will take you from start to finish with the heel without having to reset it. The weight is just adequate to do that. Not too much, not too little. And it's also narrow, so it doesn't take up a lot of space underneath. This was actually inspired by Melody Cowan from Oregon. She was looking for something to make heels and placing heel forks easier. So she sort of came up with this idea, and she was actually here visiting us once. So we made a few prototypes and refined it until we end up with a finished product. Another of the products we have now is the English style, and again, this isn't new. This came from most of the heavy, robust English machines use this type of arm to activate the heel brake. It has a counterweight on it that's adjustable. It can slide either direction to add more or less pull to the arm when you're reversing the machine. The nice thing about this is, first of all, gravity does a better job than a spring does. Springs are not constant. The more the spring tightens, the tighter it gets. I call this fishing pole type heel spring. It comes standard on the machine, but it's not the best. If you want to upgrade to something better, then this is the ticket. It installs on the existing yarn mast right there. It'll also go on some of the Auto Knitter and Ligari yarn topper guides as well. The nice thing about it is that the wire loop at the end is fat, much fatter than the thin wire here. So what that means is the yarn's going to pull through it much easier. So the yarn slides through better, less jerking, and it gives you a smoother ride. We also make other tools. We make them with brass handles. Our standard tools are aluminum handle. They're brushed aluminum. They're all grooved, so they give you a good grip without slipping. We have the latch tool, the pick tool, both in long and short versions. And we have a stitch transfer tool, which is essentially like a latch tool, except there's no latch on it, just the hook. So if you're transferring a stitch from one needle to another, or from the cylinder to the river, that comes in quite handy.
That you talked about.
This is our standard yarn guide. It's slotted. It's adjustable up and down and in and out. Heavy duty. Curve matching the curve of the radius of the cylinder. And it's also beveled on the front, on the back side, on both ends. And this makes a really good yarn carrier for doing the heel in the suicide fashion. I never loop my yarn behind the needles anymore. I always do it suicide, and I've never had a drop stitch with that. Our slotted yarn topper, again, comes standard on the machine with a fishing pole style spring. But if you want to add the counterbalance style arm to it, you can. One of the things we specialize here is developing or replicating parts for old machines. You know, old machines are old, and they're often missing parts when people acquire them, or parts have gotten lost or damaged. So, you know, often people look for something to replace those with. I had an inquiry not too long ago from a lady in the UK. She had an English machine, an Akmc, and she wanted a tappet plate for it. She was missing the tappet plate. So I happened to get hold of a Akmc tappet plate. That's what the original looks like right there. And then I produced my version of it. Dimensionally, it's identical. It's got a few more embellishments on it. And it's not actually chromed, it's a chrome powder coat, which really approximates chrome. But it has the same geometry, the same function. It's actually quite a neat piece of engineering. You know, they weren't idiots back then. They knew what they were doing. Also, just recently, a lady sent me in her old gear heart tappet plate to have repaired. And unfortunately, I broke it when I was doing that. I cracked it from stem to stern here. So they're not easy to come by. So in order to replace it, I had to make one. So that's my version of the the new tappet plate. Dimensionally and geometrically, it's the same thing. Hasn't been painted yet, but that's it. So if anybody's looking for weird parts that they don't have, we specialize in doing that. I realize that to develop one part for somebody, you might think it's terribly expensive and not affordable, but on the contrary, I don't charge for any of our development time. It's something I just love to do. I do it in my off time. And if you order something like one of these, that's a one-off, you know, chances are somebody else is going to order it again sometime anyway. But I charge for what the value of the piece is worth, and you know, as if I had it on the shelf in stock. So you're not paying for any development or hours and hours and hours of trial and error machining. You're paying for what the part should normally cost you. So, you know, I guess I didn't use anywhere near an hour, but that's pretty much it. I wish I could have shown you the shop and the machinery running, but it just wasn't possible.
Hey, Dave, we've got quite a few questions. So you wait just 1 second and I'm going to go through them for you.
Okay,
Sure.
and on YouTube, you can mention you have pictures of the shop.
Hang on. I'm trying to get where I can see the questions better. Okay. Bear with me.
One thing I forgot to mention as well is we also make all of our own springs.
Cylinder springs too.
Now, this is actually a mast spring for the old style Circulairs. We make those. We make every other spring that goes in the machine.
Okay. Someone asked, I'm not going to do these in any particular order. I'm just going to run through these. Someone asked, what does this machine cost? I'm assuming they're talking about the burgundy one that you have sitting there.
Yeah, the basic machine kit sells for $2,300. That's everything that we showed here.
And is that Canadian or US?
That's US.
Okay. And how long does it take to make a machine?
Well, that's difficult to say because I don't make one at a time. Make up a dozen or 2 dozen of any given part all at once. Right now, I'm producing about 4 machines a month.
Okay. And how long is your waiting list right now?
Right now, the waiting list is about 2.5 years.
Wow. Okay.
And it's been that way for some time. We're staying on schedule. We've got an awful lot of names on the waiting list. There's no obligation. We don't take a down payment or anything. We have so many names, in fact, that if some drop off, it really doesn't change anything for us. If you decide you don't want the machine, just tell us no when the time comes, and we go to the next person on the list.
You can mention the parts too.
The parts that we produce, that takes priority. If somebody orders replacement parts, the typical delivery for those is 2 to 3 weeks.
Like cylinders take a long time.
Yeah, we make a lot of spare cylinders and dials, and those are anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks.
Any chance you'll ever make a compound cylinder and ribber?
Well, I'm working on that right now, as a matter of fact.
Nice.
I've got a compound dial on hand that I'm just in the process of modeling up. Maybe if you just take a look quickly here. I use a 3D modeling program, and every piece that I showed you today, every piece that we use is all modeled in 3 dimensions. And then I can assemble the whole thing to actually make the machine and the computer. So I'm in the process of doing that for a compound river dial right now. And that's going to be a little while yet, but it's eventually going to come.
Do your cylinders and ribbers fit the Creelman Improved Moneymaker?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Improved Moneymaker. Yes.
Okay, let me see, what questions have I missed? You've got a lot of really nice feedback.
Thank you.
You've done a good job. Hang on,
Tell
let's
me
see.
about his web address.
I think it's on here already.
Yeah.
Oh,
And YouTube channel.
it says, oh my God, he's got me sold on Canadian maple from his forest behind the house. Will those handles fit a speedster?
I expect that the hole diameter is the same. I'm not so sure. I think the Speedster has quite a bit shorter handle, so we probably have to change the shaft on the crank arm.
That's hard to think.
But I would say yes, but probably with a little bit of modification to the crank on the Speedster.
Okay, hang on, I'm looking here.
Oh,
I've been a couple times people, and you've answered it once, but I'll ask it again. What is the weight of the heel weight?
The heel weights are 14 ounces each
Okay.
with the fork.
Talk about restoration.
As it relates to soccer machine.
Will the heel spring fit the Earlbach or Earl?
The heel spring,
That's what it says.
meaning the fishing pole type spring,
Yeah.
or
yeah.
the
I'm assuming that's what she is referring to.
yeah. I really don't know. I've only seen a couple Earls from a distance. I've never examined them closely, so I couldn't give you a definitive answer right now.
All right. Some of these questions have been answered by other folks, so that's kind of nice.
Store and collection.
Hang on. I think we're almost to the end
Tell
here.
me about his web address. I don't.
Okay, hang on. I'm just going through the questions. Is there a price list on the web?
It's coming.
It's coming. We've been dealing solely for most of the time now with the Facebook page, but Kathy's just got a website up and running now, http chambordcsm.com, and it's not complete yet, but she's got a lot of information there, and there will be a PDF price list.
Somebody asked, can you talk about the improvements / advantages you have made with your AccuKnitter?
Okay. Well, first of all, machining techniques today versus 100 years ago are quite different. Most of the important stuff that I make is done on a CNC machine, which means a computer-controlled machine. So the tolerances are much tighter than they used to be. Back in the old days, what used to happen was all these parts were made by hand by many, many different individuals. And then there was one guy at the end of the line who had to assemble machines. And he would pick parts out of the bin, assemble them. If they didn't fit, he would go back to the bin, pick another part, and he would keep mixing and matching until parts fit together. Well, today that's not an issue because the parts coming off the CNC machines are essentially, pretty much identical. So every time I assemble a machine, I take the parts I need and they all fit together. So the tolerances are better. There's less slop in the machine. So it means it turns smoother. The fact that my machine is modular, meaning anything can be fixed or replaced at very little cost. Being steel, it's almost indestructible. And I forgot to mention that my machines are guaranteed for life. Now, some of you may think that I don't have much life left in me, but it's not my life they're guaranteed. They're guaranteed as long as the machine exists. And we do have a succession plan for this little enterprise, and whoever takes over is certainly going to honor that warranty.
That question about the heel spring, she says, I meant the counterweight
On your
heel spring. Will that be Earl?
Yeah, I would have to have an Earl top guide in hand to check that, because what's important is the distance from the pivot point to just beyond the brake, and that's quite critical. So I'd have to have an Earl topper on hand. But yes, again, everything we make is custom. So if somebody wants to order one of these for their machine, I know the dimensions, just a case of making these longer or shorter, and away we go. There's no extra cost. It's the same standard price.
Okay. And oh, I had one. What oil do you recommend for your oil recommendation for your machine?
I use, what's the oil I use? Lily White. It's a sewing machine oil, but it's fairly thick compared to most sewing machine oils.
Yeah, Nancy Cole gets
Um,
really white.
I assemble on my machines with that, and that's actually what you get when you buy a machine, a little 2-ounce bottle here. And by the way, this oil has a lavender fragrance to it. So when you open up your machine and you smell lavender, that's where it's coming from.
That's awesome. Okay, I think I've gotten all the questions, but we still have 5 or 6 minutes before Amy Lonzak is due to get on here. So,
Okay.
if anybody, are there more questions? That just type them to me, and I'll get them to Dave.
I also wanted to mention that we do a lot of restoration here as well. There's hardly a week goes by where 1 or 2 machines don't come in for refurb. Again, we have all our parts and replacement parts, so we can fit them to any machine that needs them. We do for refurbishing. We repaint. Everything that we paint in the shop here goes through sandblast first. Sandblasting gives the best possible surface for paint adhesion. And so all refurbished machines get torn down, every part gets sandblasted, then they're painted and reassembled.
Okay, let's see. There's just several machines that several questions that just piled up here. So
Okay.
let's see. Some of these have already been answered by some people have been coming in as you've been going. So, how do I get tools?
Okay, well, we have an order form on our website right now.
But email.
And or you can just send us an email at dave@chambordcsm.com. That's how we've been handling all of the orders up to now.
Just so everybody knows, on the link that we shared with all of you that got you on here, Dave's email and website are on that piece, so you can look there. Dave's
also just a quick mention that I've got a collection of probably maybe 25 machines, small in comparison to others, but it's a good round cross section. A lot of English machines, French, Swiss, obviously a couple of the American machines, and the Creelman and Legary. So when people are looking for different parts, chances are pretty good that I've got a machine that already has them. So I've got something to go by to make my drawings and specifications.
Okay.